of the UN Security Council today to discuss the volatility in the Persian Gulf and what can be done to stop the potential escalation of any more possible violence or even a war. RT correspondent John Huddy is joining us from the Miami studio with more on this. So, John, what was discussed in today's meeting?
Well, first of all, this was a virtual meeting that was led by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov discussing, as you mentioned, the situation in the Persian Gulf, particularly the escalation of tension between Iran and various Gulf countries, with Security Council ministers agreeing that more needs to be done to head off a potential escalation of violence or, as you just said, Manila, even the possibility of war. In a sign of the times, the UN Security Council met virtually today with nation representatives speaking by video. The meeting was called by Russia, with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov moderating the discussion, some initial technical glitches aside. Among those in attendance included UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who, like other foreign ministers, encouraged the continuation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the agreement in 2018. China's foreign minister encouraged the upholding of the JCPOA, along with other measures to ensure a de-escalation of violence and more constructive dialogue to head off any potential violence or problems in the Persian Gulf region.
The Gulf region belongs to the Gulf states, and the local people are the true masters of the region. On family matters of the Gulf states, non-regional countries may offer constructive help, but should not overstep, still less maneuver for selfish gains.
Easier said than done. The Trump administration continues to take a tough approach to Iran, saying Iran represents the greatest threat to peace in the Middle East and continues to violate the JCPOA, a message repeated by U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Kelly Craft, during the Security Council meeting. The recent signing of the Abraham Accords between Israel, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates arguably further isolates the Islamic Republic, or, according to Ambassador Craft, brings the region closer to peace and an agreement between the Israelis and Palestinians closer to fruition. What will happen after November 3rd remains a major question that, while not addressed in today's Security Council virtual session, was likely on the minds of the ministers in attendance. If President Trump is reelected, it's unlikely the United States will rejoin the JCPOA. If Democratic candidate Joe Biden wins, it's entirely possible he could renew the work done by his former boss, President Obama, and former Secretary of State John Kerry. Unfortunately, though, it's unlikely this question will be addressed in Thursday's upcoming second and final presidential debate. One thing is certain, the election will have both domestic and foreign policy ramifications for many years to come. For RT, John Huddy.
And after an outright rejection of the one-year New START proposal by National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, today it appears the U.S. and Russia may actually deliver an October surprise. Russian officials seem to be conceding to freezing the number of nuclear warheads in an effort to bring the U.S. back to the table to sign that extension. So joining us to expand on that, former UK MP George Galloway. So George, Trump's top arms negotiator, Marshall Billingsley, will soon brief the NATO allies on these new developments later this week. What do you make of them?
Well, I think the allies will be extremely relieved if this rumor or report turns out to be true, because the idea of just letting these landmark nuclear weapons deals, treaties run into the sand for no reason at all. They've kept the peace, they've kept the cap on the arms race, would be madness from the point of view of European allies. Definitely, I can say that. So it seems as if, as you put it very well, an October surprise might just be in the offing. And then it will be down to who wins the presidency on November 3rd, just like so many other things.
Now, George, hang on to that thought, because we're going to come back full circle to the U.S. elections. But one concern about this potential new agreement is that the verification of these warheads would actually cease. It's almost simply a gentleman's agreement, if you will, and an honor system, if you will. Critics of this say either side could really be producing new warheads, but simply dismantling old ones to keep the stockpile numbers the same. Does that element of this bother you?
Well, if you think that the words are not worth the paper they're not written on, then you'll be cynical about it. But a gentleman's agreement is better than no agreement at all. It's less good than a new treaty, a treaty that will take the regime which has governed the production and deployment of nuclear weapons for many decades, since that famous walk in the woods between President Reagan, no shrinking violet, no liberal, him, and Mr. Gorbachev. So we really have an obligation to do everything that we can to continue that which has served us well. Of course, there'll be no verification, it seems, over a 12-month period. We'll be relying on the word of the president of the most powerful country in the world and the president of the biggest country in the world. Not ideal, but I'd be prepared to go with that.
Yeah, something better than nothing. But George, even if the U.S. did sign this extension, mind you, it's an Obama-era treaty, what confidence should the world have in this deal on the part of the U.S., especially if Trump wins re-election, that the U.S. would even stick to this deal anyway? I mean, given the U.S. has dumped out of the JCPOA, has allowed the INF treaty to lapse, and a host of other deals around the world, why should anybody trust that this would stick, even especially because it's a gentleman's agreement?
Well, counterintuitively, perhaps, and call me naive, though not many people do, I actually think that President Trump's instincts on these matters are better than his performance to date. I believe that he's been very foolish in surrounding himself with some of the worst people in the world, Ambassador John Bolton, for example, and all kinds of securocrats who don't want actually to push back the long arm of U.S. militarism, weaponry and war. But I think that Trump's instincts are along those lines. And I would actually think that a second Trump term would be better from the point of view, at least, of the control of nuclear weapons, a reset in relations with Russia, than a Biden victory would. After all, Biden, if he wins, is going to come to power riding a wave of anti-Russian hatred. And he's the last man likely to agree to these kind of arrangements that can, as it were, put militarism back in the box. So actually, I think, whatever the domestic concerns of people are, and I recognize them, in terms of world peace, I think Trump is a better bet than Joe Biden for a whole variety of reasons.
Wow, George. Now, I was just going to say, don't you think if Biden wins, that he would revive all of these Obama-era deals, such as the JCPOA? I mean, I think much of the world would like to see that get put back together.
Yes, I should have made a caveat over the point about Iran. There's no doubt that Trump will not reinstate American participation in the Iran nuclear deal, but that Biden would. That is the one part of the world where you can say that Biden will be a force for peace, a force for good. But everywhere else in the world, I just have the view that Trump was sincere in his campaign pledges to get America out of unnecessary, prolonged and hyper-expensive wars and foreign entanglements. I think he meant that. But he didn't put in place the people, or perhaps he wasn't allowed to put in place the people that would have seen that ship into harbor. And I harbor the hopes, you may say an illusion, that a second Trump term, were it to happen, that he could bring the soldiers home, end America's endless entanglements around the world, which have cost you trillions of dollars, that, as far as I could see, would be better spent on your own roads, streets, houses and bridges.
Hear, hear, George. You ought to drive down 14th Street sometime here by the White House and see what that drive is like. We could sure use a few potholes being fixed out here.
I have, yes.
George Galloway, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.